She was found dead in her own home, and nothing looked broken. If there was no forced entry, no struggle, and no signs of chaos, then who was Emma Wilson really afraid of in her final hours? Investigators believed it was a simple domestic tragedy, until hidden messages, silent recordings, and a single unanswered call began to expose a life lived in quiet fear. As the truth slowly surfaced, one realization became impossible to ignore. The danger wasn't outside the house, it was already inside. Welcome to Night Crime Stories Hub. Thanks to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily true crime updates. Don't forget to subscribe. The night Emma Wilson died began like countless others, quiet and unremarkable, wrapped in the familiar comfort of routine. The house sat peacefully on the darkened street, its lights glowing softly, offering no hint of the violence that had already occurred inside. When officers arrived, they found Emma lying motionless. Her life ended where she should have been safest. There were no shattered windows, no forced locks, nothing that suggested an intruder had entered. The stillness of the scene felt deliberate, almost staged. Alex Wilson stood nearby, his expression carefully controlled as he spoke to police. He said he had left the house earlier that evening after a brief conversation with Emma, insisting nothing seemed wrong. His voice remained steady, his answers precise, yet something about his calm unsettled the investigators. Grief usually arrived loud and chaotic. Alex's came quiet, contained, and unsettlingly measured. Detective Laura Bennett scanned the living room, noting how everything appeared untouched. A half-filled glass of water rested on the table. Emma's purse sat neatly by the door. It looked less like the aftermath of a crime and more like a life paused mid-moment. Experience told her that scenes like this often hid the darkest truths. Subtle details began to stand out. The television was still warm, paused mid-program. A blanket lay folded with care, not tossed aside in panic. Nothing suggested fear in Emma's final moments, and that absence disturbed investigators more than visible chaos ever could. As forensic teams worked, neighbors gathered outside, whispering in disbelief. Emma was known as warm, private, and cautious. The idea that she could be murdered without a struggle felt impossible. Yet the evidence offered no comfort, only questions that refused to settle. Every unanswered question pressed heavier, demanding explanations no one was ready to give. When an officer gently lifted Emma's phone from the kitchen counter, the screen lit up. A single missed call blinked back, unanswered and unexplained. No name appeared, only a number. In that instant, the room shifted. What had seemed like a tragic mystery now felt intentional, and the investigation had only just begun. From the moment investigators began asking questions, a familiar narrative emerged. Alex and Emma Wilson were described as devoted, successful, and deeply connected. Friends spoke of shared dinners, weekend trips, and quiet routines that reflected stability. Social media showed smiles, celebrations, and carefully framed happiness. To everyone watching from the outside, the marriage looked unbreakable, almost enviable. Alex reinforced that image during interviews. He spoke lovingly about Emma, recalling small habits and inside jokes with practiced ease. He insisted arguments were rare and harmless, nothing more than ordinary disagreements. His story painted a relationship grounded in trust. Yet as detectives listened, subtle inconsistencies surfaced, details that shifted slightly each time he spoke. Detective Laura Bennett began comparing Alex's statements with timelines, messages, and witness accounts. Times blurred, conversations moved, and certain moments were emphasized while others vanished entirely. These were not obvious lies, but soft distortions, the kind that suggested careful control rather than confusion. The more Alex explained, the less complete the picture felt. Behind the scenes, Emma's life told a different story. Her phone revealed unsent drafts, late-night searches, and private notes hidden behind harmless apps. There were questions about freedom, safety, and starting over. Nothing criminal, nothing explicit, just fragments of a woman quietly unraveling. The contrast between the public marriage and Emma's private thoughts was impossible to ignore. As the investigation widened, detectives reached out to Emma's inner circle. Most echoed the same belief. Alex adored her, and Emma seemed content. Then one call shifted everything. Sarah Miller, Emma's closest friend, hesitated before speaking. Her voice lowered, heavy with guilt. Sarah explained Emma had become distant, guarded, and fearful of being watched. She described late messages, sudden cancellations, and an unspoken urgency. Emma had asked her to promise silence, warning that speaking too soon could make things worse. That secret, Sarah said, was now impossible to keep. It was a truth that directly contradicted Alex's story, and detectives realized the perfect marriage had been carefully hiding something dangerous. The investigation was about to change. With Sarah Miller's revelation lingering in the air, investigators turned their focus to Emma Wilson's final 48 hours. Every movement, message, and silence was mapped carefully, hour by hour, creating a timeline that felt increasingly heavy. What began as routine daily activity slowly shifted into something strained, deliberate, and emotionally charged. Phone records became the backbone of the reconstruction. Late-night calls stretched longer than expected, often repeated, often unanswered at first. One contact stood out immediately, saved under a harmless, almost forgettable name. Yet the frequency suggested urgency, not casual conversation. Technicians noted that several calls ended abruptly, as if someone feared being overheard. Alex maintained that those 2 days were calm. He described shared meals, ordinary conversation, and nothing resembling conflict. According to him, Emma showed no signs of distress, but digital traces disagreed. Text drafts deleted before sending revealed hesitation and emotional weight. Search histories pointed toward anxiety, secrecy, and preparation rather than comfort. Investigators noticed the pattern of escalation. Conversations intensified as the hours passed, particularly during the nights. Emma's activity spiked when Alex claimed they were resting together. Location data from her phone placed her pacing within the house, sometimes stopping for long periods, as though waiting or listening. The pressure felt constant, unseen, and building. Emails to herself, saved as reminders, hinted at decisions Emma had not yet voiced. Times, dates, and names were carefully noted, then revised. It felt less like planning a day and more like preparing for a confrontation she feared could not be avoided alone inside. As detectives aligned Alex's statements with timestamps, the gaps became harder to dismiss. His timeline relied heavily on memory, yet the data told a sharper story. Small discrepancies appeared harmless alone, but together they formed a quiet accusation. Something had been happening inside that home, something Emma never documented directly. The final step was cross-referencing external surveillance. Nearby security cameras were reviewed, frame by frame, searching for movement that matched the reconstructed hours. For most of the night, the street remained empty. Then a familiar vehicle entered the frame, paused briefly, and disappeared. The timestamp didn't match Alex's account. CCTV footage placed him near the house at a time he had firmly denied being there. The discovery of Emma Wilson's notebook marked a turning point in the investigation. Tucked away among old receipts and folded documents, it was easy to miss, almost as if it had been hidden in plain sight. The pages were worn, the handwriting uneven, reflecting exhaustion rather than habit. Detectives immediately sensed this was not a diary meant for memory, but for survival. As they read through the entries, a quiet pattern emerged. Emma wrote about control disguised as concern, arguments that ended not with resolution but silence. She described moments when her words felt monitored, when decisions were questioned until she doubted herself. There was no dramatic language, no accusations, only restraint, which made the fear feel more real. Each entry suggested a woman slowly shrinking within her own life. Several pages focused on emotional fatigue. Emma wrote about being tired of explaining herself, tired of apologizing to keep peace. She mentioned feeling watched, measured, corrected. The repetition was striking, as though the same cycle replayed endlessly. Investigators recognized the signs of emotional manipulation, subtle but deeply damaging. Between the lines, something else became clear. Emma was preparing for change. Dates were circled. Notes referenced conversations she hadn't yet had. She wrote about needing courage, about timing, about consequences. Whatever decision she was planning, it carried risk, and she seemed painfully aware of it. The notebook read less like reflection and more like a countdown. Meanwhile, Alex continued his interviews, calm and cooperative. He spoke softly, choosing his words carefully, never raising his voice. After reading Emma's private thoughts, that calm took on a different meaning. What once appeared as composure now felt controlled, rehearsed. Investigators began questioning whether his steadiness was genuine or practiced. As the final pages were turned, one line stopped everyone cold. Written darker, pressed harder into the paper, it stood apart from the rest. It was not reflective or uncertain. It was direct, almost pleading. Emma had written, "If anything happens to me," and the sentence ended there, unfinished, like a warning she never had the chance to complete. It changed how investigators viewed everything. The warning left unfinished in Emma Wilson's notebook reshaped how investigators viewed the evidence already collected. What once seemed like a tragic domestic incident now demanded deeper scrutiny. Forensic teams returned to their findings, questioning early assumptions and re-examining details that had been dismissed as routine or inconclusive. The medical examiner's report revealed the first major inconsistency. Emma's estimated time of death did not align with Alex Wilson's stated timeline. According to Alex, he had been away during the critical window, returning only after everything had already happened. But biological indicators suggested Emma died earlier than claimed, narrowing the window to a period Alex could not fully account for. Location data added further pressure. Receipts from a nearby store showed Alex making a purchase close to the house, minutes before he said he had left the area. Phone pings placed his device moving slowly through streets surrounding the home, not rapidly away as he described. Individually, these details seemed explainable. Together, they painted a troubling picture of proximity and opportunity. Investigators were careful not to rush conclusions. No weapon had been recovered. There were no visible defensive wounds, no clear signs of a violent struggle. The absence of obvious force continued to complicate the case. It suggested planning rather than impulse, restraint rather than rage. That possibility made the lack of direct evidence even more disturbing. Alex was confronted with the discrepancies. He offered explanations that were calm, almost detached. He blamed faulty memory, stress, and shock. His answers were consistent in tone, if not in detail. Detectives noted how often he emphasized cooperation, as though willing behavior could replace clarity. Behind the scenes, digital analysts dug deeper into Emma's phone. Deleted files, fragments of conversations, and partial backups were examined line by line. Most led nowhere, remnants of ordinary life. Then one recovery attempt succeeded. A single message, erased but not destroyed, reappeared during extraction. The text was brief and unfinished, sent hours before Emma's death. It wasn't addressed to Alex. It didn't explain everything, but its tone was urgent, fearful, and deliberate. Investigators knew this message would challenge every version of events they had been given so far. Attention shifted abruptly after the recovered message pointed investigators toward Emma Wilson's workplace. A coworker, Michael Hayes, surfaced as a potential distraction from the growing focus on Alex. Emails between Emma and Michael revealed guarded language and carefully scheduled meetings. Nothing explicitly romantic appeared, but secrecy alone was enough to raise suspicion and redirect the investigation. Detectives explored the possibility that Emma's private struggles extended beyond her marriage. Financial records showed small, irregular transactions tied to lunches, shared rides, and short trips during work hours. Surveillance footage placed Emma and Michael together on multiple occasions, always cautious, always brief. It looked like a hidden connection, one that could explain the urgency in Emma's final messages. As attention moved away from the home, Alex seemed almost relieved. During interviews, he remained composed, cooperative, and eager to assist. He answered questions without hesitation, offering timelines and details freely. To some investigators, his demeanor suggested innocence. To others, it felt rehearsed, as though he believed control had returned. Michael denied any involvement in Emma's death. He claimed their meetings were professional, related to confidential projects and shared deadlines. His explanation appeared plausible, supported by co-workers who described him as quiet and reliable. For a brief moment, the case felt as if it were drifting away from Alex entirely. Investigators followed Michael's movements closely. Bank statements, badge swipes, and phone data were examined. At first, everything aligned. His alibi placed him miles away during the estimated time of death. The shift in focus seemed justified, as pressure on Alex temporarily eased. But one overlooked detail refused to settle. A timestamp from a parking garage camera contradicted Michael's account. The footage showed his car entering later than claimed, leaving a gap during a critical window. When confronted, his explanation changed, then changed again. The collapse was subtle but undeniable. That single inconsistency unraveled the theory built around him. Investigators realized the coworker had been a diversion, not the answer. As attention returned to Alex, the false lead left behind a sharper truth. The real threat had never left the home. All eyes turned back inward. Pressure returned to Alex Wilson the moment investigators refocused their attention on him. Interviews that once felt conversational grew sharper, more deliberate. Detectives laid out timelines side by side, pointing to moments where Alex's version shifted subtly. He listened, nodding calmly, but the strain beneath his composure was becoming visible. Audio recovered from Emma's phone changed the tone of the room. Short recordings, captured unintentionally during arguments, played through the speakers. Emma's voice trembled as she tried to reason, explaining feelings she said had been dismissed repeatedly. Alex's replies were controlled, firm, and final, ending conversations without resolution. These were not explosive fights, but quiet assertions of authority. Investigators watched Alex closely as the recordings played. His posture stiffened, his breathing slowed. The contrast between his public calm and the private dynamic was striking. Emma's fear, once hidden in notebooks and fragments, now had sound. It was documented, undeniable, and deeply unsettling. Detectives pressed harder, asking Alex to explain specific statements Emma referenced. He deflected at first, claiming stress and exaggeration. But the pattern was clear. Emma adjusted herself to avoid conflict. Alex decided when discussions ended. The imbalance was no longer theoretical. It was preserved in evidence. As questions narrowed, Alex's answers became shorter. Silence filled the room more often. He rubbed his hands together, avoiding eye contact, a subtle shift from earlier confidence. Investigators revisited the night Emma died, repeating details he had shared before. Each repetition exposed a crack. Finally, one detective leaned forward and asked about a gap in the timeline Alex had never satisfactorily explained. The room waited. Alex exhaled slowly, his voice lower than before. He admitted he had not been entirely truthful. He said he changed details because he panicked, because he feared how things would look. It was the first time Alex acknowledged deception. He confessed he lied about part of that night, insisting it didn't mean what they thought. But the admission landed heavily. If he lied once, investigators wondered, how much more remained hidden about Emma's final hours? The investigation tightened, preparing to expose truths Alex could no longer control. Alex's admission opened a door investigators had been pressing against from the beginning. With deception now confirmed, they re-examined Emma Wilson's digital life with renewed clarity. What emerged was not sudden, but painfully gradual. Emma had been preparing to leave the marriage, not impulsively, but carefully, as though anticipating resistance. Recovered messages revealed a pattern of emotional manipulation stretching back months. Emma's words were cautious, often apologetic, while Alex's responses grew increasingly absolute. He questioned her loyalty, minimized her fears, and framed separation as betrayal. Some messages carried subtle threats, not violent, but heavy with consequence. References to reputation, stability, and what people would think appeared repeatedly, pressing Emma into silence. Private conversations with friends showed desperation. Emma spoke of needing space, of feeling smaller every day. She described Alex's control as constant, not loud, but exhausting. Decisions were negotiated until they no longer felt like choices. Investigators recognized a familiar trajectory. Control tightening as independence threatened to break free. Financial records supported the narrative. Emma had begun separating funds, researching housing, and adjusting schedules. These actions were quiet, deliberate, and concealed. They pointed toward an exit strategy formed under pressure, not a sudden escape. Alex, investigators believed, sensed the shift long before she voiced it. Alex's need for control now stood at the center of the case. Witnesses described how he managed appearances, conversations, even Emma's social interactions. His calm demeanor masked rigidity. The possibility of losing authority over the life he structured appeared intolerable. The motive was no longer speculative. It was documented, layered, and consistent. With motive established, the remaining question was timing. Detectives returned once more to the forensic timeline, requesting a final, comprehensive review. New data, overlooked indicators, and refined analysis were applied. The margin of error narrowed. The sequence of events tightened. When the updated forensic report arrived, it contradicted earlier assumptions entirely. The estimated time of death shifted, collapsing Alex's revised account. The window moved to a moment he had not mentioned, a moment that placed him directly at the center of Emma's final hours. With that adjustment, the case didn't just make sense. It aligned with devastating precision, setting the stage for a truth Alex could no longer outrun. The final forensic reconstruction stripped away every remaining doubt. Investigators concluded that Emma Wilson's death was not the result of an accident, nor a sudden loss of control. It had been staged carefully, designed to appear quiet, unremarkable, almost invisible. The absence of forced entry, the calmness of the scene, the deliberate timing, all of it now pointed toward intention. Piece by piece, Alex Wilson's carefully maintained image collapsed. His statements were dismantled by data, his composure reframed as calculation. What once looked like grief now resembled performance. Detectives presented the full sequence. The manipulation, the fear, the confrontation Emma had been preparing for, and the moment control finally slipped beyond repair. Emma's hidden struggle explained everything investigators initially failed to see. Her silence was not weakness but strategy. She had been navigating danger privately, documenting it carefully, hoping to leave without provoking escalation. The notebook, the messages, the recordings were never meant to accuse. They were safeguards she never lived to use. In court, the narrative was no longer divided. Evidence spoke louder than emotion. Alex's defense unraveled under the weight of consistency, detail, and motive. The jury saw the pattern clearly. Control tightening as independence grew, fear intensifying as separation became real. Justice, when it came, was decisive. But justice arrived too late to save Emma. Could only define what had already been lost. Her story became a warning rather than a rescue, a reminder of how quiet harm can be overlooked until it is irreversible. Investigators acknowledged that the signs were there, scattered, waiting to be connected. When the case officially closed, files were archived and evidence sealed. Publicly, the truth felt complete. Privately, detectives carried an unresolved weight. One question lingered long after the verdict, whispered rather than spoken. Had Emma realized how close she was to being believed, and if someone had listened sooner, could the ending have been different? That lingering doubt ensured the investigation would never truly end, following those involved into silence, memory, and reflection. Where answers fade but responsibility remains, echoing far beyond courtrooms and headlines long after the case closed. If this case kept you captivated, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We upload new crime case videos daily. Until then, stay alert, stay aware.